Long ago, in the heart of the bustling city, was the airport, known for its sinister reputation. Among the countless flights that took off from its runways, a particular route, Flight 1313, was discussed in a low voice. This flight gained a bad reputation due to strange accidents that happened on board, causing an indescribable feeling of anxiety among passengers and crew. One stormy night, when the sky was painted in dark and sinister tones, Flight 1313 had to take off as planned. The passengers gathered at the exit, unaware of the terrible fate that awaited them. The plane, an aging ship with an obsessive presence, loomed over the flight field. Its faded paint and faded interiors seemed to reflect the unknown horrors that lived inside. When the passengers settled in their places and the plane rolled down the runway, an ominous feeling spread through the cabin. Passengers whispered while talking about strange incidents that had occurred on previous flights. Many dismissed them as mere urban legends, trying to suppress the growing anxiety. They did not suspect that the next flight would defy their skepticism. When Flight 1313 got up in a dark and stormy sky, a thick fog arose, enveloping the plane in an otherworldly haze. The cabin went dark when the overhead light froze, then suddenly went out, leaving the passengers in frightening darkness. When the plane shook and the turbulence affected their nerves, panic began. Flight attendants, trained to keep their cool in the face of adversity, did their best to calm the frightened passengers. They were walking around in the dark cabin, the rays of their flashlights passing through a thick fog, momentarily tearing off troubled faces, distorted by fear. In the middle of this chaos, a little girl under the age of 8 disappeared from her place. Her parents, bewildered, called the flight attendants, desperate for answers. A desperate quest ensued. The crew members searched every nook and cranny of the plane, their hearts beating with a mixture of horror and distrust. However, despite their efforts, no trace of the girl remains. She simply dissolved in the air. While rumors were circulating among the passengers about the disappearance of the girl, they became afraid. A palpable atmosphere of horror pervades the cabin, leaving no soul untouched by its icy fingers. Nervous eyes darted to the sides in search of some semblance of normality in this rapidly deteriorating situation. But the nightmare was just beginning. New disappearances have begun to be reported. Adults, children, the elderly. No one was immune from this inexplicable phenomenon. The seats of the missing passengers remained free. Their belongings were left as a chilling reminder of their sudden and inexplicable disappearance. The remaining passengers, horrified, clung to their loved ones. Their prayers mingled with the growing hysteria. The crew, stunned by the unfolding nightmare, struggled to maintain an appearance of calm, while their minds were on the verge of madness. Meanwhile, the pilot, isolated in the cockpit, remained in ignorance of the horrors taking place in the cabin. Ignoring the endangered passengers, he valiantly drove the plane through the storm, relying on his skills and experience to get them all to safety. He did not suspect that the evil force acting would not allow them to escape from his clutches so easily. The hours passed, each second stretched like an eternity, until finally the plane emerged from the thick fog, opening the view of the distant lights of the city below. The captain, determined to land the plane and put an end to this nightmare test, made an announcement via intercom, informing the passengers that they were a few steps away from landing. Relief swept over the remaining passengers when they waited for the end of their painful journey. But once the wheels hit the track, An all-consuming feeling of fear invaded the passenger compartment. The missing passengers, those who have been lost in the mysterious void, reappear as if provoked by a terrible fate. They remained seated in their original place. Their eyes were empty and their bodies deprived of warmth. The survivors had a collective sigh as they witnessed this horrible spectacle. The return of the missing passengers was no reason to celebrate. Instead, it served as a chilling reminder to the soul that they had not escaped the clutches of an unknown creature chasing Flight 1313. The doors opened, and when the remaining passengers got out, their steps were painful by the severity of the general injury they had sustained. The airport authorities conducted an investigation, but the true nature of the missing passengers and the sinister force that captured Flight 1313 remained an unsolved mystery. To this day, the haunting legacy of Flight 1313 persists, a dismal reminder that there are areas beyond our understanding. This is an instructive story, reminding those who dare to board the plane that not all flights are what they seem to be. So, the next time you get on the plane, take a moment to look at your fellow travelers and ask yourself, will you be the next to disappear into the abyss?
Once upon a time, in the golden age of aviation, a famous airline pilot named Captain Robert. Known for his exceptional skills and unwavering confidence, he was highly respected among his peers, and passengers admired his calm demeanor even during the most turbulent flights. However, the world knew little about the dark secret that was hiding in the cockpit of his plane. It was a moonlit night when Flight 666 was supposed to take off. As usual, Captain Robert, accompanied by his trusted co-pilot, entered the cockpit to prepare for the flight. The atmosphere was unusually heavy, and there was a feeling of malaise in the air. Unbeknownst to them, the spirit of the deceased pilot, Captain James, was chasing the very plane they were going to command. Once in flight, strange events began to occur in the cockpit. The device inexplicably failed. The altimeter was showing impossible readings, and the compass was spinning uncontrollably. A ghostly whisper could be faintly heard in the background, causing an unpleasant tension between the two pilots. They exchanged nervous glances, but struggled to keep their composure and focus on their tasks. The temperature inside the cabin suddenly dropped, cooling their bones. Captain Robert looked out of the window only to see an unearthly figure standing on the wing of an airplane, dressed in the uniform of a pilot of a bygone era. The figure's eyes shone with supernatural power, and a cold shiver ran down the captain's spine. As the flight continued, the situation worsened. The autopilot system of the aircraft turned on and off by itself, which made it increasingly difficult for pilots to maintain control. The lights flickered intermittently, casting strange shadows on the cabin. Despite the growing fear, Captain Robert and his co-pilot struggled to regain control and stabilize the plane. Suddenly, a gust of icy wind swept through the cabin, extinguishing the instrument indicators. Darkness enveloped them, and the plane began to descend rapidly. The pilots desperately struggled with the force pulling them down, their hearts pounding in their chests. Panic gripped the enclosed space as they struggled to regain control and prevent a catastrophe. Amid the chaos, Captain Robert noticed the ghostly figure of Captain James sitting next to him in the co-pilot seat. An evil smile appeared on his face, and his eyes were filled with malice. It was as if Captain James's spirit was enjoying their despair, reveling in their struggle with the inevitable. With all his strength and experience, Captain Robert mustered every ounce of his determination to level the plane just before the crash. Power was restored in the cabin, and the instruments came to life. The plane stabilized, which allowed the pilots to regain control, although it was shaken to the core. For the rest of the flight, Captain James's obsessive presence lingered in the cockpit, the feeling of his eyes watching their every move. The passengers were completely oblivious to the battle taking place in a confined space a few meters away from them. After what seemed like an eternity, the plane landed safely at its destination. Captain Robert and his co-pilot landed, their faces pale and haggard. Passengers relieved to have survived the grueling flight thanked the pilots for their experience, unaware of the horrors they had endured. However, Captain Robert was forever haunted by the eerie memory of his encounter with the vengeful spirit of Captain James. Night after night, he woke up in a cold sweat, tormented by a ghostly presence that had penetrated his once adored cabin. The darkness of heaven, which had once been his sanctuary, now held a terrifying secret from which he would never be able to escape. From that day on, Flight 666 was canceled forever. The plane was considered too frequented to be trusted with the lives of innocent passengers. He was left parked on the crumbling runway, an eerie reminder of the horrific events that took place in his haunted cabin. And over the years, the story of Captain Robert and the cursed flight has become a cautionary tale for aviators, a reminder of the invisible forces that could lurk in the very heart of their plane, waiting to unleash their unholy presence on unsuspecting souls who dared to fly away.
In a small isolated town located in the heart of the mountains, an old and abandoned plane was on a dilapidated runway. Its dilapidated facade and broken windows testified to long years of abandonment. The townspeople whispered stories about his dark past, a remnant of a tragedy that happened many years ago. They talked about Flight 131, an unfortunate journey that left a mark on the history of the city. Legend had it that Flight 131 was cursed, a flight that should never have happened. The story began on a moonlit night when the plane, filled with unsuspecting passengers, took a regular flight to a nearby city. But fate had something else for those on board. In the middle of the flight, the plane was enveloped by a mysterious storm, dark clouds swirled in the sky, and lightning crackled. Inside the passenger cabin, a feeling of embarrassment seized. The flight attendants exchanged alarmed glances, sensing that something was wrong. As the turbulence intensified, panic spread through the plane like a forest fire. The passengers clung to their seats to whiten their knuckles, praying that this nightmare would end. Suddenly the cabin was illuminated by a blinding flash of lightning. In this instant glow, the passengers saw a frightening figure, the ghostly vision of the stewardess, her eyes empty and full of despair. The passengers screamed in horror as she dissolved into thin air, leaving a frightening silence behind. The storm raged incessantly, mercilessly beating the plane. The frightened pilot fought valiantly to regain control, but his efforts were in vain. The plane raced through a stormy night, its engines strained, struggling against the strong wind. And then, in a frighteningly abrupt silence, Flight 131 disappeared from radar screens, leaving no trace behind. After that, the search and rescue team scoured the mountains, in the hope of finding survivors or remains of the plane. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, but all efforts turned out to be unsuccessful. Flight 131 and its passengers disappeared without a trace, swallowed up by the mountains and destroyed by the curse that enveloped the plane. Decades have passed and the legend of Flight 131 has grown, turning into an instructive story told over campfires and whispered in a low voice. But for a group of thrill seekers, these stories were a tantalizing invitation to discover the truth. They were determined to investigate an abandoned plane to counter the curse that has haunted the city for so long. One fateful night, when the full moon was flooding the mountainous landscape with a frightening glow, the group gathered at the foot of a ruined track. Their lanterns pierced the darkness, illuminating their faces with a mixture of anticipation and fear. The wind whistled through the treetops, carrying with it a bad feeling that danced along their trunks. Their leader Alex, a fearless adventurer with an insatiable curiosity, took the initiative. With each step towards the plane, the atmosphere became heavier and heavier, as if the air around them was filled with sinister energy. An abandoned plane loomed in front of them, a ghostly reminder of the tragedy that took place within its walls. As they gently entered the plane, their nostrils were filled with a musty smell of decomposition. The interior was a fascinating sight. Rows of empty seats, dangling seat belts and shabby magazines were scattered on the floor. The group watched nervously, their heartbeats intensifying as the weight of the curse fell on them. Ignoring the voice of reason that whispered in their heads, they continued. Their determination overcomes fear. They dared to go further into the cabin, the beam of their flashlights pierced the darkness, illuminating glimpses of the tragic past. Suddenly, an icy breeze swept over the plane, turning off their lights in an instant. In the total darkness, panic broke out among the researchers. Their screams filled the cabin as they fumbled for their flashlights, their hands shaking trying to find the switch. But when their lights came back on, they realized with horror that something had changed. They were no longer alone. The frightened eyes of the group were riveted on the ghosts that now filled the plane. Around them, the translucent figures of the passengers of Flight 131 materialized, sadness and despair were reflected on their faces. The cries of the seekers mingled with the painful cries of the trapped souls, creating a cacophony of horror. Desperately trying to escape from the vice of the curse, the researchers fought their way through the ghostly crowd, making their way to the exit. But the cursed plant seemed to change, its corridors lengthened and took them into a labyrinth of torment. Each turn they took them deeper into the nightmare, their hope flickering like a dying flame. A murmur echoed in the cabin, ghostly voices that mocked and tormented. The shadows danced along the walls, hiding in their depths unspeakable horrors. The researchers felt the severity of the curse pressing on them, exhausting their strength and spirit at every moment. One by one, the members of the group succumbed to the anger that surrounded them. Some have dissolved into thin air, leaving behind only the echo of their frightened cries. Others were trapped in the eternal loop, condemned to wander forever according to the cursed plan. Their souls were absorbed in eternal torment. All that remains is Alex, the fearless leader, now transformed into a trembling soul on the verge of collapse. When his spirit was broken and his willpower weakened, he came across an old newspaper slipped under the seat. It belonged to a passenger on Flight 131, a survivor, who described the horrors he had experienced in the last moments of their doomed flight. In the diary, Alex discovered the revelation, the key to lifting the curse. He was talking about a long-forgotten ritual buried deep in the city archives. It was a desperate plea for salvation, a call from the ancient forces to free the trapped souls and lift the curse that bound them. With newfound determination, Alex embarked on a perilous journey, rummaging through the city's archives in search of a long-lost ritual. The days turned into nights as he unraveled the secrets of the curse, gathering fragments of forgotten knowledge. Finally, armed with the knowledge he was looking for, Alex returned to the cursed plane. The ghosts watched him with empty eyes, their silent despair testifying to their desire for liberation. Alex knew that doing the ritual was his only chance to get out of the vice of the curse. In a dimly lit cabin, he spread out ancient artifacts according to the instructions, painting protection symbols on the floor. With his trembling hands, he pronounced spells passed down from generation to generation. In his voice, we could hear a mixture of fear and hope. As soon as the last words flew from his lips, the cabin shone with a dazzling light. The trapped souls screamed in pain, their ghostly forms twisting as the curse struggled against its imminent release. But Alex was firm, his faith in the ritual was unshakable. At a climactic moment, the curse collapsed, and the trapped souls were freed from their torments. The plane shook when a powerful gust of wind swept through the passenger compartment, taking away the remnants of darkness stuck to its walls. When the lights finally went out, Alex found himself alone in an abandoned plane. The curse has been lifted, the restless spirits have finally found peace. As he walked along the ruined track, the first rays of dawn flooded the mountainous landscape with a golden glow, a symbol of the new beginning awaited by the city. The news of Alex's triumph spread through the community, and Flight 131 turned from a horror story into a story of redemption. The townspeople embraced the survivors of the cursed robbery, their hearts filled with gratitude for the brave soul who freed their loved ones from eternal suffering. And over the years, the abandoned plane has become a solemn memorial, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the sky, but also a testimony to the resilience of the human spirit, capable of breaking even the most insidious curses and finding light among the shadows.